What's happening, everybody? Welcome to almost the 200th episode of the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Today's guest is an extension of the ongoing series I'm looking to do with drum manufacturers entitled How'd They Make It? And today's guest would be Ramy Antoun of Austin, Texas custom drum company A&F. I became conscious of their amazing drums and seeing drummer Dan Mayo play them, and was immediately interested in delving further into the design of them, so who better to talk to than the man Ramy himself. Hope y'all enjoyed the deep dive every bit as much as I enjoyed talking to him about it all. Shout out to my sponsor, New Orleans Record Press. If you're looking to put out vinyl for your project, go on over to NewOrleansRecordPress.com to check out the many coloring, packaging, mastering options, and you can add it all up in that real-time quote generator. Need assistance with design or packaging? They can help you, and they print both 12 and 7-inch records in 150 and 180 gram variants, and they print small runs of 100 and larger runs up into the thousands. And that's NewOrleansRecordPress.com. Crash Bang Boom can be found on my iTunes podcast, my SoundCloud YouTube pages, Stitcher, Luminary, Google Play, Podbean, as well as the new Amazon Music Podcast Network, and then some. If you like what you hear, feel free to check it into the previous nearly 200 episodes. Give me a like, a subscription, a positive rating, etc. And as mentioned in previous episodes, do keep tabs on musicians teaching lessons, giving classes, tutorials, and more online, as well as websites like SaveOurStages.com, where we're looking to bail out music venues so we can actually have some shows to get back to when all this shit settles. Hell, maybe you can even buy a snare drum, or a mini snare drum, or a gong drum from an amazing company like A&F. Support any way you can. So here we go, y'all. A&F, a.k.a. Anton and family. Killer drums, super cool dude, good times. Ramy Antoun, Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
All right, I'm here with Ramy Antoun of the one and only A&F Drum Company out of Austin, Texas. Ramy, what's happening, man? How are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me on the podcast, brother.
Absolutely, man. I'm a fan of both your drums and a couple of the endorsees that play your drums, and Broady, Simpson, and of course Dan Mayo. And I'd certainly like to talk to you more about those two players in particular. But in the meantime, you're presently based out of Austin, Texas, correct?
Yeah, we're in Austin, Texas, man. Deep in the center of Texas.
I hear you, man. I'm a fan of Austin, and I think it's autonomous in the state of Texas, similar to the way New Orleans is to the state of Louisiana. And I grew up about an hour outside of New Orleans, and I tell you what, in about that hour, you realize pretty quickly that the rest of the state is quite different from the city that you just came from.
Yeah, man. My tagline in my email, my personal email is, from Austin, the island.
Yeah.
It's a totally different vibe.
Yeah.
In Austin than it is kind of the rest of Texas. And not good or bad. It's nothing like that. It's just different.
Totally. Well, man, again, I'm a fan of your drums. I've been checking out a lot of videos of the different dimensions, different shell types, and this and that and the other. So I'll definitely get into that. But to start off, how has COVID been affecting drum manufacturing on your end, and has it slowed down significantly? Is it semi-steady? How has it been going?
I'm going to say that's bittersweet. Well, I'll start with the bitter side. The bitter side is a lot of the obvious. Like, I hate seeing people suffer and, seeing it every day on social media, and just the different varying degrees of people going through craziness. And so that part, it weighs, I know it weighs on everybody. It's definitely weighed on us. The sweet part for us is, by God's grace, man, we've been very conservative as a company, financially. And that's because I've had a lot of hard lessons in business previous to this company and some other companies where I wasn't conservative, and I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. Right. So, when we started A&F, there was a dedication to staying debt-free, staying conservative, at some point owning our real estate, which we do now.
Nice.
And a lot of those things, and then qualifying for some of the government assistance for small businesses.
Yeah.
All of those things combined helped us weather this significantly well, I would say. I mean, our team is still here. We there was a season of cutting hours and trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, but that was really quick. And then we were, back into normal hours. And the hardest part, I think, for the company has been some of our materials providers. like Remo, for example,
Sure.
the head company, they shut down in California
Ah,
for almost 2 months. And it was like, oh, well, how do we get heads for
Sure.
our drums
yeah.
that are shipping, And it was like, man, there was nothing you could do. Like they were shut down. And so again, I was calling every retail shop that we work with that carry our drums and buying heads from them. It didn't have our logo on it, but at least the drums are going out, with heads on them.
Yeah.
So we made it work. That was like first world problem. It wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't a big hit for us on the business. It was a big hit for us emotionally to watch what was going on in our country and
Sure.
across the globe. I mean,
Of course.
this wasn't just a U.S. issue. It was a global pandemic. And so, I mean, in my lifetime, I've never experienced that.
Absolutely, man.
I know that's like probably I'm answering it more than you wanted to know, but
No.
as far as the business is concerned, thank God the business is good. We had 3 difficult months, and it was more about, like I was saying, navigating, just our material suppliers, people who supply wood, people who supply, brass sheets and metal sheets, and they were in different parts of Texas. They were under different conditions financially,
Mm-hmm.
and so some of those businesses had to scale back, which meant trying to get our metal sheets to cut and roll
Mm-hmm.
took a little bit longer, or, trying to get wood veneer to make our wood shells.
Right.
Well, for 4 weeks we couldn't
Mm-hmm.
because they were closed. So that part of it was difficult. You know what? Honestly, the other thing that really saved us that we're really grateful for is, we had released hardware at the beginning of the year,
Right.
and it was supposed to be shipping to everybody in March. Of course, that was completely closed. Shipping anything on a boat in mass quantity
Mm-hmm.
was not happening. And so that got delayed 3 months.
Wow.
But right at July, everything arrived. And, that was all sold out already. So we got it to all the shops. That really helped our summer.
Yeah.
I mean, again, man, just grateful. We sold out the first 2 full orders. And so we're sold out for hardware until around November.
Wow.
As far as getting it to the shops.
Yeah.
So all the shops have it. Some of the shops have already sold their stuff, and so they're waiting for the next shipment. But yeah, man, that's been really exciting and fun. And that was like a 3-year pregnancy with the hardware.
Wow.
So all those things have really helped us sustain and, kind of grow through the summer. And so remarkably, here we are in September, and we're back on our same growth path, which is, again, man, it's just a blessing. I don't know what else to say.
Damn, man. Well, tell me a little bit about the origins of the company and what led you to making these drums, and we can talk a little bit about the materials in which they're made, whether it be metal or wood, etc. So to start off with, I guess, just tell me a little bit about the origins of it and what led you to drum manufacturing and whatnot.
Yeah. Man, the whole thing was a total accident. None of it was intentional. I had still have a different company at the time that I was doing full time, and I was running that business, and I was celebrating essentially, 30 years of playing drums.
Mm-hmm.
And I told my wife that I was, chatting with her, and I was like, hey, I really would love to buy a commemorative 30-year drum. Like, I want to spend some money and get something that really celebrates this milestone. And, she was cool with it. So we set aside a budget. I went shopping, and I ended up getting 2 drums that were very expensive, very beautifully made. And they had their own sound. It just wasn't the sound that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And that sound that I wanted, really lived in a couple of vintage drums that I'd had for the length of my career,
Mm-hmm.
and had been on more records really than any other drum I owned. And so out of, sheer desire to find a way to remake that sound and modernize some things that I really wanted, I started down this path of designing and making my drum, and I found a local builder here in Austin that was making drums out of wine barrels.
Mm-hmm.
And we got along really well. It was a side thing for him. He had a day job, but he was doing this as a hobby. And so I asked him if he would have enough patience and grace with me to make the drum that I wanted, and if he could do that. And I was admittedly saying, listen, man, this is a selfish project. I just want to make the thing that's in my head. If you can entertain this, I'll pay you for your time. We'll make one for you, one for me. Can you let me be fully creative control on this and do this thing? And he agreed. And, 6 months later, not without driving him completely crazy, but, we had our first drum. It was a 4x14 raw brass, snare, 10 lugs. It was probably the 6th or 7th one. I mean, we made numerous ones to get to that one.
Right.
But when it was the one and I hit that drum, it was like a Ratatouille moment. Got a little teary-eyed, and it just all came to focus. It was like, wow, that is incredible that this thing that lived in my head that I was agonizing over that probably nobody cares about.
Yeah.
But it's here, like it.
Right.
And I was so happy, and he made one for him, and that was it. It was done. We made some food together, celebrated. It was over. And I posted a video or a picture and then a video on Instagram. And I had producer friends and drummer friends and, engineer friends going, man, that's a great drum. How old is that thing? Where'd you find it? And I was like, no, we made it. This is my drum, man. I made it. We're done.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, no, man, you got to make one. I want to buy one. How much was it? Like, what does it take?
Yeah.
And so that started us, And, naively, we were like, let's just make 25 of these, man, and that's it. And then it was 50, and then it was 75, and then it was 100. And we're like, we're not making more than 100 of these.
Yeah.
But maybe we should make a different size. And then maybe we should make a drum kit. And just, yeah, man, one thing led to another, and we had a drum company.
That's wild, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. Very crazy.
Well, let me ask you this, man. I spoke to Jeremy Berman of Q Drum Company, and I think one of the things that makes them pretty distinctive in the manufacturing of drums is that they do not only brass, but copper, steel, or just metal drums in general like that, not only for snares, but for entire kits. So I know y'all do some interesting metals with snares, but are y'all doing full metal kits as well as wood kits?
Yeah, and by the way, man, Jeremy is a badass mofo. Like that guy, I don't know if he told you, but when I was endorsed with Orange County, Jeremy and Max made my drums.
Oh, that's wild.
And as long as Jeremy made my drums, then I was stoked because I knew that guy's attention to detail, man. I love that guy. I love what he does. I've always been a fan.
Wow.
So I'm glad. I was happy to hear the podcast with him. I listened to it.
Nice.
But yeah, that was a side note. I just wanted, he's awesome. Those guys are awesome. They make amazing drums. We're really more of a metal. Like we started out with brass.
Yeah.
And then we did the wood thing, and then we did, copper and bronze and steel and nickel over brass. So we really got into the metal stuff. Now we have a different process. It's not conventional by any means.
Uh-huh.
It scares some people, and that's okay.
What is it? You got to tell me.
The reason why it scares people is we hand roll and weld these drums, and we don't put reinforcement rings in them.
Right.
There's no way to hand roll a perfect circle.
Mm-hmm.
So you can roll metal and then put a re-ring in it, and it makes it a perfect circle.
Yeah.
But you can't hand roll something and get a perfect circle. You can get close.
Yeah.
But I could not get this sound that I wanted without doing it this way.
Huh.
And so that's the juxtaposition, right? Like the catch. So we just decided, you know what? We're cool, man. As long as we get our sound, we're okay getting to it, but in this manner, and I'm okay explaining as much as people want to ask and dig in to the process, because it all goes back to the sound. I mean, the sound is why we do what we do.
Right.
Everything else just kind of came along because that's what worked to get that sound.
That's awesome.
We weren't after a certain aesthetic. Honestly, the whole raw brass thing was more about, I really want a snare drum that I don't care about sweating, bleeding, rolling around, dropping. I want a drum that's like, kind of indestructible in a way, that no matter what happens, it always sounds this way. And so the least we can do to this, the better, but let's get really, really good materials and let's make it ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's how the raw brass thing came about. It wasn't let's make this specific aesthetic. It was almost the opposite. It was like, let's do as little as possible with the aesthetic, but let's get really, really great raw materials and let's make it all ourselves as much as we can.
Right.
So that we can control the structure of it and the sound. So that's where it all came from, man.
Damn, man. Well, you mentioned earlier coming from a few vintage drums that maybe inspired your trek into this world, and some of the tonal qualities associated with them that you specifically liked. And it sounded like those were vintage drums. So, as someone in myself who I have a couple 76 Ludwig Supraphonics, both the 5x14s. I have like an 80s Acrolite 5x14 and a 70s Slingerland Gene Krupa snare, which I guess is chrome over brass. And at some point, I realized I really love brass snares, and the tonal quality of that metal in particular for snares, I just absolutely love. I ended up buying more and more of these brass snares, even like 80s sort of free-floating pearl versions of it. They have their kind of poor man's version of a Black Beauty that they do, another brass one. I went down a rabbit hole of purchasing, because I'm approaching my mid-40s, and I called it like my midlife snare crisis. I just started buying fucking snares left and right. But what I did realize is that while I've had some wooden snares over the years, I presently don't own a single one. And I guess I have 10 snares, and they're all varying metal snares. So one of the things that I think is especially interesting about your drums is that I think that there is a tight tonal quality that is maybe more specific to modern designs, but there's a resonance of older drums and more vintage drums that I heard. So I guess tell me a little bit about maybe whether that's the density of the material itself, or the rims that you chose, or even the bearing edges, where you were able to sort of straddle that divide sonically between the two worlds.
Yeah, I think that if we're going to go back, I would go back to those two vintage snares that kind of inspired the sound and direction.
Yeah.
Those two snares were definitely, one of them was from turn of the century, and one of them was 1920s.
Wow.
1920s was a Ludwig nickel over brass.
Wow.
And the turn of the century one, I think, was either a German or French marching snare that had those like thumb tensioning, tension rods. So
right.
I had to play it. I had to turn the shell upside down to be able to play the hoop. The bottom hoop is the top hoop, so I wouldn't hit those thumb tension things. But,
oh my God.
But I was, I was outfitting them with modern Remo heads, modern snare wires, because I was using them on records, like pop records.
Wow.
Rock records, and I needed to lay into them, and they needed, to perform.
Yeah.
But I didn't want the sound to change, and so I just really kind of took that into A&F. We are making shells and hoops and lugs like they were being made 100 years ago,
right.
But we're using modern heads and modern wires, and it's that marriage of that, like you said, kind of like the modern tightness, but that really old school warm tone.
Yeah.
That I think vintage drums are just championed for.
Totally. Wow.
Yeah, man. And I wanted to say that I sat down and was like scientific about it, but I didn't have a clue about the science.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew vintage drums, and I felt like I had a grasp on what I wanted my drums to sound like in the studio every time I did a record. And so I took as much of what I knew and loved about drum sounds and vintage drums, and I poured it into this crazy little company, you know?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny. Oftentimes when people use the phrase modern vintage, I'm like, oh, shut up. But I think that your drums actually somehow, both in their appearance and in their sound, have a really interesting place in the sonic spectrum of drum design. So that's why I'm kind of psyched about talking to you about it.
That's a beautiful compliment, man. I really am grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, question with your wood drums, if we're talking about more vintage, especially like, turn of the century drums, I know like my knowledge of Ludwig's, for instance, doesn't probably proceed much prior to the early 60s and the 60s where they were doing like, thinner 3-ply shells with the reinforcement rings, going that kind of route. How many plies are you using for if you're doing wood drums? Well, first of all, I mean, y'all do have some wooden shell drums as well, correct?
We're a full-blown company now, man. We got wood lines and metal lines. It's kind of crazy, but yeah, we make we have a maple shell that we make. I'll tell you the configurations, the ply configurations in a second. But we have a maple shell, we got a mahogany, we got a walnut, and we now have a teak. That's our newest one.
Gotcha.
So we actually went further back. So my era, my passionate era of drums goes probably more like 1920s to 1940s.
Wow, that's amazing.
So somewhat into the 50s. And of course, I love the 60s. I love drums, man.
Yeah.
But I really related more to just the old stuff, and I always kind of envisioned the stories these drums could tell you if they could speak.
Totally.
So when we started doing our wood shells, one of the wood drums that I really loved of the past was those old 50s, late 40s, early 50s Gretsch round badge shells where it was a thin shell. There's no re-rings. And I think it was the Jasper shells. I love those shells. I love the way they sound in the studio.
Wow.
So we have a similar approach as far as it being a thin shell. So although it's a 7-ply shell that we make, it's under 4 millimeters.
So it's
extremely thin.
Wow.
Yeah. And there are no reinforcement rings.
Huh.
So it's a very interesting approach. Now we have some structural things that go into how we make the shell that make it very strong. But that's our shell. And so with the maple, it's a combination of maple and poplar. With mahogany, it's mahogany and poplar. With walnut, it's walnut and poplar. And then with teak, it's teak and maple.
Wow.
So it's an interesting. Sorry, the walnut is walnut hickory. My bad.
Okay, there you go.
Walnut hickory on the walnut, and then the teak is teak and maple.
That's crazy, man. Definitely expanding the line here.
We've expanded the line. On one side, we take forever to do something.
Yeah.
On the other side, as a boutique company, we sure are putting a lot of stuff out.
Yeah.
I'm my own worst critic, so I'm careful. But, man, if I get inspired by something, I'd like to say we go after it and put it out. But if I get inspired by something, then I'd, overwork it for 6 months. Then I don't do anything about it. Then I revisit it again.
Yep.
Then I try different sizes.
Yeah.
Then I put it away. It's like that's my process. So, it's been we're in our 5th year now, and we have the 4 wood shells that we make. I think we have 7 colors.
Wow.
And then we have the 4 metals plus the nickel over brass option.
Damn.
So it's a lot, but it's not. But it is, however you want to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed with with the rims that y'all use, you don't generally use the standard flanged rim, for instance, or die cast or whatever, where it just has the holes for the tension rods to go through. Y'all do the more sort of claw over a wooden rim, similar to what would be on a bass drum, which ties back to the design of some of those early drums, which it sounds like you're a fan of. Is that are the majority of the drums that kind of style for the tension rods holding down the rims?
All of our drums, we make all the hoops. For metal hoops, what I did was I took the width, so the surface area that your stick hits on a triple flange hoop. Mm-hmm. This is where I did get scientific. I took that surface area because that's a good surface area. It doesn't chop your stick.
Right.
Whereas the vintage hoops actually chop your stick because they're so thin. So we took the surface area of a triple flange hoop and we made that the total thickness of our no flange hoop. Mm. So you're still hitting the same surface area with your stick as if you would a triple flange hoop. So it's not going to chop your stick, but there is no flange and it's made out of solid brass and it incorporates a clip and a tension rod. The reason why I went that route is our lugs, which is part of what we patented. One of our patents is our lug design. Our lug, the tube actually is free floating within the lug. Mm-hmm. So if you take your tension rods off, that tube has movement. And that allows those lugs, the tension rods, to sit evenly as soon as you put it on, but independent of every single lug on the hoop.
Right.
So it gives you a lot of freedom to detune something and not have to worry about it messing with the whole, like the tuning of the whole head.
Right.
It also allows you, I feel like, some more tuning range and independence, around the drum. So it just gives more freedom.
Yeah.
It's not anything crazy.
Right.
But yeah, and then with our wood hoops, it's the same thing. Everything, because that lug is free floating, so every single lug has its own freedom when you're tuning it. I like to think that it gives a little more freedom. I don't know the science behind it.
Yeah.
But it works for us, so we've kept it. We haven't changed it.
Absolutely.
2 times we've made triple flange hoops. Once was for Charlie Watts because he wanted triple flange hoops on his A&F snare.
Wow.
And the other one was for Abe Loboriel because he wanted triple flange hoops on his A&F snare.
Damn.
And so there were 2 guys that was like, all right, we'll definitely make you triple flange hoops.
Whatever you're asking
but
for.
we still made it out of raw brass. So
wow.
It was cool.
Very cool. Very cool, man. Well, there's a specific design inherent in most snare drums, and it's interesting talking to you about these early for me, again, it's kind of started in the 60s, 70s of my knowledge about drums, but the snare bed is kind of an interesting one in that, in your superphonics and whatnot, the snare bed is maybe a little more gradual, whereas I actually purchased a snare in the last year during my snare midlife crisis I was telling you about, but it was a wooden shell, fairly thick, and the snare bed was kind of drastic, and I actually struggled to tune it. And I realized I've been kind of playing vintage drums that are maybe 8 lugs with a gradual snare bed on them. And then I've found that they were easier to tune, and I actually struggled to tune this modern drum with a more drastic snare bed. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on snare beds on like your snare designs, for instance.
So let me start by saying A&F would not exist without the F. The F stands for family.
Okay.
And so there's a family of guys and girls that work as a team to make these drums. I wish I was skillful, like a Jeremy or even a Ludwig, who these guys actually knew how to make stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to make stuff like that.
Right.
I'm a player and a designer.
Yeah.
And I know what I want. I know when we get it. But my hands and feet are our team, our family, and so like when we first made the first snares, that bed initially was much narrower and deeper. Mm-hmm. in the very first versions, but we quickly moved away from that because we found that if we did a much wider and gradual bed,
Yep.
we were going to get much more sensitivity.
Yep.
And which was what we really wanted.
Yeah.
And so our beds are definitely, they almost go from lug to lug where they start, and they're very gradual.
Nice.
But they'll get to about 1/8 of an inch deep.
Gotcha.
So it's significant, but it is gradual.
Right. Yeah. Which is more in tune with the sort of superphonic kind of design that I love because again I've collected those drums throughout the years. But as far as the throw off, was there anything in the functionality of the throw off or the butt plate or any of that stuff that you as a player wanted to see in the design of these drums?
Yeah, man. So I had an old, it was a Camco 1960s Camco tuxedo lug kit. And that had the original George Way throw off on it. And that's that beer tap, throw off.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple. I loved it because I could flip it off with my stick or kick it up with my stick.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could adjust the snare sensitivity on the opposite side, on the butt side.
Mm.
And so that gave me a lot of freedom on the throw side. And so when we started making our drums, I had started a design for our throw off, but then I realized that Ron Dennett had bought the rights to that original George Way throw off and was remaking them.
Mm.
And so I just reached out to him and said, "Hey man, I would love to use these snares. Can I buy them in bulk from you and use them for our drums? I love them." And so he was gracious and very complimentary and kind. And so that's what we've been using. Now I still have our throw off design, and I do want to make it. I just haven't spent the money. It's very expensive to tool up for something like that.
Yeah, I bet.
And we're a small company, man. We don't have a lot of just cash lying around. So we had to make a decision about 2 years ago. Do we invest in the hardware and tooling up for hardware, or do we invest in the throw off and, a different clips and claws that are proprietary to A&F? And I really wanted the hardware first. And so now that we've released the hardware this year, finally, and we've paid for the tooling and gotten through that big mountain, the next year I'm going to spend designing our throw off and redesigning our clips and claws, and hope to have those done by next year once we can afford the tooling and stuff. So,
oh man,
man, it's like taking small steps, baby steps, but trying to be smart about prioritizing funds so we don't go into debt.
Sure.
I still love this beer tap throw off that George Way made. I would just love, I guess I would love to design a throw off. I've never done that.
Right.
And it would be such a joy to actually do that, and then have it be on our drum. So hopefully it works out. If it doesn't, I'm totally happy and satisfied with the one we have now too. So it's kind of a win-win.
My God, man. Well, one of the, I think, hallmarks in the appearance of your drums is that sort of raw metal aesthetic, I think, that y'all really have and embrace. Does that hark back to those turn of the century drums? I actually am not familiar with the finish. Were some of those metal drums? Were they more often wooden drums?
Yeah. I'll send you some cool pictures of the drums
that
I'm talking about. One of them is nickel over brass, so it just had the nickel faded and kind of into a grayish luster, and it's beautiful. But the raw brass one was this turn of the century marching snare. It was made out of brass, but over the 100 years that it aged, the brass had tarnished and had this patina to it. And then the second thing was, and I could say this now, but when I was playing professionally, I was endorsed by Zildjian, and I would get my new cymbals, and I would dig a hole and I would bury them for a week, and then pull them out of the dirt and then just kind of brush them off and play them. And they would get that patina.
Mm-hmm. That's hilarious.
And so, yeah, a combination of that and that old drum, that's what inspired the direction or pursuit of that finish on everything metal that we do.
They look great, man. And again, it's super interesting hearing you talk about your fascination of some of these earlier drums, how that affected the design of some of these, but inevitably how you still retained some of those earlier characteristics of vintage drums, again, within sort of a modern design is a feat. So congrats on even being able to do that in the first place.
Thank you, man. That's really, really a beautiful compliment. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, tell me about some of the more interesting dimensions of some of the drums that y'all done. I saw some crazy shit. I think you were demoing it. It was like a gong snare drum, some giant fucking like floor tom looking snare drum thing.
Yeah. So here's the deal, man. I want to think that every drummer, if they had the opportunity to walk into a drum factory and go, hey, I would love to make something crazy, and then actually have everybody go, cool, let's do that.
Yeah.
I think that we would have a lot more crazy stuff out there.
Of course.
Because yeah, man, I'm a drummer, dude, and I'm like a kid at heart with drums. And so now I've got a drum company, and I actually have the opportunity to walk in and go, I'm not trying to pull the boss rank, but everybody stop. Let's go make something crazy. Mm-hmm. And it's okay. We can all do it. And so, yeah, man, I walk in, I'm like, hey, how big of a drum can we make? Let's make a big snare and let's make the wires for it. And let me call the guys at Remo who have been absolutely amazing with us. And so I call my guy at Remo and I'm like, hey dude, can you make me a 28-inch snare bottom? And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, snare hazy, 28-inch.
Wow.
Can you do it? He's like, I'll call you back. And he calls me back and says, yeah, we can do it. I'm like, all right, we're going to make a 28-inch snare because that's as big of a snare wire that we can make.
Oh my God.
So let's go make a 28-inch snare. And then we do it. And it could sound like crap. I don't care.
Right.
But we just did something and we had fun doing it. And sometimes the stuff sounds crazy good and unique. And other times it's totally gimmicky and we're like, okay, well, that was fun, but I don't want to release that, you know?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that snare, man, we put that thing in the studio. I've got a studio here in Austin. Mm-hmm. I've always have. And so when we get something we like, we take it in the studio, we throw the mics up.
Nice.
And we listen. That's kind of like the final test, really, before we put something out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we put that drum in the studio, and the low end from that snare drum was bleeding into the bass drum mic and causing our subwoofers to rumble in the studio. This is a snare drum.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like, okay, this is cool. I can see composers using it in film scores. I can see people like big bands that want to put something crazy on stage and literally rattle the whole stage.
Totally.
With thunder. You know, it's that kind of thing. And so that's exactly what happened, man. When we released it, obviously there's the novelty, like, oh, this is hilarious. This is crazy. You know, are they compensating for something? You know, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then there were like some composers and some rock guys and some studio guys who are like, hell yeah, I want that in my studio. I want that on stage. I want that on this film score because that's an amazing sound. Right. And I want to sample it. So, I mean, I didn't think we'd sell 2, you know? And we probably sell about 6 or 7 a year.
No shit.
Which is crazy. That's kind of cool, you know?
Fucking A it is. It's ridiculous. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then the bass drum, a really amazing, accomplished composer, drummer, just like all around badass dude, who was an artist of ours, had reached out and said, hey man, I'm thinking I would like a 36-inch brass bass drum. Mm-hmm. And I said, That's funny because I've been thinking about a 40-inch brass bass drum.
Of course you have.
How about that? And he's like, dude, let's do it. And so he actually commissioned that drum. We called it Big Bertha, but it was, it was a 40-inch brass bass drum. We took it to NAMM, and we attached all these crazy, like, little drums and cymbals and gadgets on it. It was like a sound effects machine, you know?
Totally.
So that's how that happened. You know, he commissioned it, we made it, and that was it.
Wow.
You know?
Holy shit.
So there's been some cool stuff like that too. Like Eric Stone Street, who's one of the actors from Modern Family.
Mm-hmm.
He had reached out and said, "Hey man, I want you to make me this like a miniature drum kit, but it has to sit on my shoulder somehow so I can walk around playing it."
Oh.
And I'm like, are you talking about like what
like quads with a marching band?
Like quads and marching band, or is it like the dancing monkey with the bass drum thing and the cymbal and the clang, you know?
Right, all the shit on top of it, yeah.
The wind-up toy, yeah. And he's like, yeah, both.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay. So we made this, like, we had a little bass drum, and had little snares, we had little hi-hats made. We did like a hanging cymbal arm with a splash on it. It was like a really cool thing, and sure enough, man, he wore that thing and marched in his front yard, and we took a video. It was just hilarious.
Wow.
But, you know, getting back to what I was initially saying, that's the joy of being able to make everything here with all these talented people is, again, walking into the shop and going, guys, I know everybody's got work to do, but everybody stop. Let's make something fun and crazy. And it could totally suck. It's okay, but let's do that. Or,
that's amazing.
Hey, we got this crazy order that we got to figure out.
Right.
We've never made this before, but let's figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's fun, you know. So that's how that stuff comes about. We really try and have a no limits philosophy because we're totally okay failing. It's fine.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost that much to fail. I think it costs us more to not experiment.
That's a great way of looking at it. So some of the more interesting like accoutrement that I've seen in some of these designs, and speaking of sort of designing out of the box, they're like arms that tighten so you can put a tambourine on the front of a bass drum or a little muffler or stuff like that. That is a really interesting one as well that I really dig.
Thanks, man. That's the kick bone. And it's the bone is as in trombone because it has a sliding gadget.
Right.
And it was in an effort to create a way to add sound effects to your bass drum without having to leave the drum chair.
Right.
So if I did a record with some odd sounds on my bass drum and I wanted to play that live, and let's say there's a tambourine on the kick or there's a snare on the kick or a muffler, whatever it is, so I can control that by just loosening and tightening or the slide, the bone action to and from the head. And
right.
we filed a patent and got a patent on it, and it was like, all right, well, I guess we're doing this.
Wow, it's crazy.
It's great, man. It's so with our hardware and accessories, I will say this: I grew up loving Legos. My wife loves Legos. My kids love Legos. The idea that a unit like a specific block could stand the test of time over and over again, and you can make incredibly intricate things or very simple things with that same block. That is a brilliant design.
Totally.
And so with hardware, nowhere near the brilliance, but we were inspired to want to make stuff that could be modular like that, that could fit within each other, that could switch out.
Yeah.
So if you bought a kick bone, you can also take that kick bone apart, and you've got two hoop-mounted clamps. You've got an additional arm that you can use to mount cowbells or other bracket mounting percussive instruments. The same with our hardware, like our snare stand is obviously also a tom stand, but we really did focus on making sure that as a tom stand, it wasn't deadening the tom, that it was actually allowing the tom to have full resonance.
Wow.
And then you could go vertical with it, and it can hold a snare in any kick position. and we have a pedal attachment that attaches to the snare stand that you can attach your pedal to. And so now you have this like little bass drum that you could take to acoustic shows or whatever you want to use for. And so it's just thinking about, and even, you know, the cymbal stand bass fits on the snare stand bass and vice versa. So if you want to play a snare drum standing up, you just flip out the top of the snare stand with the bottom of the cymbal stand, and you can be as tall as 6'7" and play that snare standing up.
Yeah.
So it was thinking through all those things, which is why it took us so long to make hardware. But it was like thinking through all the possibilities with one stand. So every time we make something, how many things can I make this one item do?
Yeah.
And, you know, if it wasn't at least 3 things, it wasn't going to be made.
Right.
Because that was a waste of material, you know? And does this thing exist in the market already? If it does, let's not make it. We don't want to compete with anybody. Let's only make things that we feel like are missing. Let's try and fill a gap, you know? And so that's kind of what we were doing.
Well, one thing that I didn't ask you about with these drums is there a consistent bearing edge that y'all do? Do y'all kind of go for the more round over edge that was maybe like on a superphonic type snare or maybe earlier snares? I'm not sure what the bearing edge is or if it was even consistent, you know, with older drums necessarily.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and the answer is yes, no, maybe. I don't know as far as old drums, but
yeah, right.
But with us, we have 2 edges that we stick to. One of them is for all the wood drums, except for the steam bent shells, which I'll tell you in a sec. But and the second one is for all the metal drums.
Wow.
So all the metal drums have a very soft 45.
Okay.
And I say soft because these are thin shells, and there are no reinforcement rings. So unless we soften that edge, it's going to cut right through your head.
Sure.
So it's not that we're cutting an edge into the drum for the sound. We're softening the edge of the metal so it doesn't cut your head.
Okay.
And then on the wood shells, there is actually no edge on the inside of the shell at all. It goes straight up. And then the outside edge is a slight round over, enough to suit the concave of the drum head.
Okay.
The essence of our edge is how little can we do to these edges and still have full dynamic tuning range so that you can hear the wholeness of the shell. So we're really trying to be, it's kind of a purist approach, but that's essentially what it is. And then with our steam bent shells, it's a very, very sharp 45.
Interesting.
Those are thick wood shells. So we'll do a sharp 45 on them.
Gotcha. Well, do you have a favorite drum that A&F has produced, or a prototype in your belongings that you especially love, or what are some of the favorite drums that maybe you're in possession of that you especially love?
It's always such a hard question because it's like, which of your 2 kids do you love more and why? You know,
I mean, I have one in particular that I favor, but we don't need to tell them that.
We don't tell them that. Don't play that. I'll do top 3 snares.
Okay.
And then my favorite kit.
Okay.
Because it's hard. That 4x14, the first one that we made that we only made 100 of, is still one of my top 3. I love that drum. I've always loved that size and snares, and that thing it just has a magic thing for me. Our gunshot snare, which is a 4x18 metal drum with wood hoops.
Whoa!
I love that drum because it's a snare drum that sounds like a gunshot. It's a floor tom that competes with any of my floor toms. It's a bass drum that I can take on any gig or any session.
Wow!
And totally freak people out with how much low end it has. It's such a versatile drum, man. I love that drum.
Yeah.
And then the 3x10 Rude Boy, which is that little brass, mine's brass, but for anytime I'm trying to recreate loops or break beats or whatever.
Yep.
I can pull that thing out and tune it really dry and low, and it's amazing. For a 10-inch drum, it shouldn't sound that way.
Right.
I don't know how it does, but it does. And so I can show up anywhere with those 3 drums and make a record, no problem.
Amazing.
Like, I don't even need another kit.
Yeah.
Those 3 drums, I can make a record, I'm good. But if I was going to bring a kit, it's the Royals. It's the raw brass kit that we make. I love those drums.
Yeah.
And I do them with walnut hoops because it warms it up a little bit in the studio. If I was playing it live, I'd have the brass hoops. But the Royal kit with the walnut hoops is my go-to in the studio.
Wow. Well, speaking of all these awesome drums, 2 great drummers who I mentioned earlier, and Broady Simpson and Dan Mayo. How did you end up hooking up with them as A&F players? Because between the 2 of them, you got one in Israel, the other in Australia. So how did you ultimately connect to 2 guys in those places?
Yeah, man. And this actually would speak to our whole artist roster. Thanks to our A&F following, like our social media family, I'll call it. If we didn't have a great social media family, we couldn't have done what we did with our artists. So most companies, right, the reason why you'd sign an artist is because that artist has notoriety and will bring a certain amount of advertising to your company. And so you go out and you look for the names, the guys on the big stage. And I remember looking for an endorsement as a drummer, and I could only get an A-level endorsement when I was on an A-level stage where there was enough exposure for the company to warrant giving me drums, right? Well, we were able to take a different approach because we already had a following on Instagram. It was a blessing to go out and actually just sign like drummers that I just absolutely loved what they were doing.
Wow.
Irrelevant if they were touring with big artists or not. Like, that didn't make a difference.
Yeah.
It was just, are these guys amazing drummers? Are they good people to work with? And would they really benefit from what we make? Would it help them do what they do better? That was the criteria. It was not about following or how many shows are you doing and who are you playing with or what records. It was none of that. It was just, dude, you're a badass drummer, and wow, what an awesome person you are to work with. And I really think we can make you some stuff that's going to help you do what even better. And so that's how it happened. And with Dan, I saw a video of Dan on Facebook, and I think it was the first video that he posted ever. His manager posted, and they paid $100 on Facebook to boost it.
Okay.
And I saw it and was like, wait, why is this guy not on every platform? Like, he's a killer drummer, super creative.
Totally.
Does not approach the drums like anybody I've seen.
Yeah.
Where is he? And so I reached out and said, hey, man, I want to meet you. I want to know who you are. Do you need help with anything? I have a drum company, but even if you don't need drums, if you want something else, I want to help you.
Yeah.
And so I started the conversation, and then we signed him, and we talked about what kind of stuff that he'd want to start with, and we made a bunch of stuff. He got it, and I asked him to find a studio, go in and record and make some videos, because that's the one thing I do need from you. I can't help you unless you help me with content, because then I can put it out. And so he did that, and I posted videos, and you've seen it happen, man. Like, he went from this kid in Israel who is the badass that he is, but now so many more people are able to see him do what he does well. Oh, totally. And Meinl, he signed with Meinl after that, and Vic Firth, I think, on sticks, and remote heads, and we just helped him get as many deals with the instruments that he was playing right away, because people needed to know who he was, man. He's awesome.
Yeah, totally.
And a sweetheart of a guy.
Oh, I bet, man. What snare is that he's playing on that Meinl cymbals video? That's actually where I first saw him. I might have seen him on Instagram prior to that. I forget. But in particular, hearing those drums mic'd up was one of the reasons why I became such a fan of them. And in particular, his main snare that he's playing on there. Do you know what snare that is by any chance?
Yeah, that's a 5x14 raw brass. The whole kit is brass.
Gotcha.
And the different size snare drums, and he's the gunshot as his floor tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his main snare is a 5x14 brass.
Damn.
With most of our artists, it was the same thing. Broady had already had a significant presence on social media.
Mm-hmm.
That guy is able to play in the most ridiculously independent way. I mean, it's kind of sickening what that guy can do.
Totally.
It's not like three human beings playing at once. It's like he's able to play like three machines.
Yeah.
Playing at different meters, and it's incredible, man.
It's pretty incredible for sure.
I couldn't help but think every time I see his video, I just couldn't help but think, man, I have so many snares for you that are going to even help you do what you do even more.
Yeah.
And I want to get you some instruments. And so we had started talking, and he came to NAMM a couple years ago and actually played the stuff in person.
Mm.
And then he got it. He was like, "Oh, okay, I get it." I don't want to speak for him, but he told me, "Yes, I get it." Yeah. And we got to do this thing. And so that's how that happened. And again, with all of our artists, it was just me seeing something and going, "Yes," and then reaching out, or them reach out to us. And we spent some time on Skype or FaceTime or whatever,
mm-hmm.
getting to know each other. And it feels like a really good fit, personality-wise, then we go. And again, my thing is, it will help with what you need, even if it's beyond drums. If you need heads, if you need sticks, if you need cymbals, tell me who you're playing, and I'll reach out to those guys. Those are all friends of mine.
Yeah.
We all work well together. With Geneva, our youngest artist, she was 8 when we signed her. She's 10 now.
Wow.
But, she didn't have any endorsements, and I reached out. She was playing Sabian. So I reached out to Chris at Sabian and said, "Hey, man, there's this girl. She's really good. She's a really sweet girl. Her parents are awesome. They really believe in her. She's working hard as a kid, harder than any kid that I've ever seen work. I think this is something you should check out." So we connected her there. She did a deal. She did a deal with Vader. I reached out to Chad, same thing. So it's just been awesome to be able to connect with them.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that we approach our artist roster. Yes, we have signed some bigger names, but it wasn't because we reached out to them. It was because they reached out and said, "Dude, I love what you're doing. If there's something I can do to help or work with you guys, let me know." And of course I would reciprocate and say, "Dude, you're amazing. I love, that you reached out in this way, and I love the way you play. How can we help?" And, that's how some of those relationships start, whether it was Matt Chamberlain or whoever. There's a lot of great. Greg Wells is one of those amazing writer, producer, but also a phenomenal drummer. And he reached out and said, "Listen, man, I've heard the videos, and if they really sound the way they sound on those things, and if you're telling me you're not processing or EQing those drums, and they sound like that, then I'm in." And so, we made a kit, sent it over there. He mic'd it up. He heard it in the studio without mics, and so okay, I'm in. And so here's a guy who's paid handsomely and sought after for his ears. Mm-hmm. He's the golden ear guy, and to get his kind of backing was a tremendous compliment.
Yeah.
But again, all that said, it has been very organic. Our artist program has been very organic. We don't give drums away. Mm-hmm. We can't afford to. We're a small company.
Yeah.
And so the drums are earned.
Right.
And there's cost of materials and cost of labor in exchange for, us doing the promoting and helping to do our end of helping a drummer's career along. But nothing's for free. We're not in a position to do that.
Yeah. I hear you, man. Well, what's your story as a drummer, man? You've spoken about playing upwards of 30 plus years. July of next year, my birthday, in fact, of next year will be 30 years of me playing drum set specifically, I guess. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I guess we're in the same boat as in at least duration.
Yeah,
Sounds like you got a few years on me. But what's your story as a drummer? Like, how'd you even stumble upon the instrument in the first place?
My dad was a hobby musician. So he played piano at home, and then he would put together like these wedding bands, and we'd go out and do, stuff on the weekends or for New Year's or whatever. And so I started tapping on things when I was 3. He heard that I had time, that I could keep time, and he got me like a toy kit. And before you knew it, I think I was 7 or 8 when I started doing those wedding gigs with my dad.
Mm.
So I've been playing as long as I can remember. It wasn't encouraged as a career in my family. It was just encouraged as a hobby for fun. And as long as I could get good grades and, was doing good at school, then I could play music, I could play sports, I could do these other things. But outside of playing with my dad, I didn't play with my first real band until I was in college.
Wow.
I didn't even know how I fared as a drummer comparatively.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought I just played. And so played in college while studying and playing sports. And then I graduated college. I had gotten into law school, and I was working at the time as a probation officer because I was I know, dude, what a wacky circle. I was trying to find a way into the courtroom once I graduated law school.
Mm-hmm.
And really the only way I could do that right out of law school was to work in the DA's office. So it's a long story, unnecessary to this conversation. The part that's necessary was in my first year of that chaos, I had this like, almost like a panic attack, kind of.
Yeah.
I wouldn't medically declare it a panic attack, but I was in my car and I just kind of was freaking out about the fact that I hadn't really pursued music other than a hobby, but I've been playing my whole life. And I wondered if there was something that I should be doing before I dive into this 50-year career.
Right.
Like, what was I missing something? Am I walking away from something that I should really investigate now before it's too late? And so I quit my job I dropped out of law and I jumped in the van with a reggae band and just started playing.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of playing, and that led to playing on records and learning more about the record industry and publishing and sync and playing in the studio. I was primarily focused on session work, so I spent a solid 7 years as a session drummer in LA.
Mm.
And then my first big tour, I got a call from a music director, and he was like, "Hey man, do you want to go on the road with Seal? We're looking for a drummer." And I was like, "Yes," but I got to figure out some things because I'd built a name for myself as a studio drummer. And if you leave town for a long time, you're not the first call anymore for those producers that you work with. And so that was a tough decision,
Yeah.
but I really wanted to go on the road, especially with Seal. I grew up listening to those records and loved the music. And then the musicians were just like, I think some of the best musicians I've ever played with were on that gig. And so I did it, man. I jumped in, and for almost 4 years was touring and recording with Seal, and that was an amazing journey.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, and it ended with me transitioning to my band. One of my bands, it was me and a singer that we were writing and producing songs together, and we made this record, and somehow it ended up getting this crazy deal with Universal, And so I exited the Seal gig to go and be in this band that we just signed to Universal and make this record and tour on it and all. So that was kind of the drumming journey. And
Damn.
at the it's a long journey, man. You asked a big question. It's a long journey.
Yeah.
But somewhere in the middle of leaving Seal and signing to Mercury or Universal Mercury, my wife, we got married and we moved to Austin. I think I hit a wall while we were touring on our record, the Universal record. The band was called Gold Spot.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going in to make the second record. And I hadn't gotten involved in some mentorship capacity with struggling artists in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
Struggling not just occupationally, but maybe with addiction. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I'll just call it this like a recovery type group or organization helping artists who are going through crap.
Gotcha.
And it's not just financially, but spiritually, emotionally, addictions, like whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
But it was providing some safe places for artists to talk about that stuff, but also bringing everything that I learned in building a career as an artist and helping in that way, just kind of imparting information if it was helpful. And I really fell in love with it. It was working with a big church, but it was really hyper-focused on creative people. And it wasn't that you had to be part of this church or even spiritual to talk about, hey, how do I make a living as an artist? And what did you learn as a professional drummer? What did you learn when you were writing music for TV and film? And so I had done all these things and was able to kind of just share experiences.
Wow.
All that to say, that took more of my attention, and I really didn't want to go on the road anymore. And so I took a break, man. I took a good 5-year break. I did play in those circles, and I did write in those circles, but it was more in the capacity of projects that were about some kind of a healing nature, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then, in that space, I discovered a love for creating experiences with film and music and dance and kind of all aspects of creative arts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started a company that created these experiences that helped nonprofits raise money, helped bring awareness to Battered Women's Shelter, to the Salvation Army, to trafficking, to just all these social causes that we could use art and music and film and dance to help bring awareness to and funds to. And so that was the company I was running when I started A&F.
Wow. That's one hell of a wildly, I would say cyclical, but I guess it is. I mean, you started with drums, ended back at drums, but the journey between point A and B is pretty extensive and pretty wild, man.
It's crazy. And honestly, when we started making a few drums, before it was really a company, right about then I started to fall in love with playing again, because I had just stopped playing. I was like, I had done some unique gigs here and there, only because I lived in Austin and I knew some producers and stuff. But really, man, when we started making drums, I started to fall in love with it again. And although I haven't done a lot of tours, I did about a 4-year on and off tour with Ed Kowalczyk from the band Live.
Mm-hmm.
His 20-year celebration tour of Throwing Copper. So that was awesome because I grew up on that record.
Oh, me too. Totally.
Yeah, dude. I toured that record and it was awesome. It's amazing.
That's cool.
Got a chance to open for the Rolling Stones, which was insane.
Wow.
Yeah, man. And then really just when A&F started, just focused on making drums, and I still do records here and there. I still do one-off gigs. 2 years ago, I got the insane opportunity to play with Paul Simon, Bonnie Raitt, like all these crazy artists in one stage.
Whoa.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's insane, man. Like, what an insane gig.
Wow.
So that was cool. So I still do.
Bet it was.
I mean, it's crazy, right? Like, I don't play anymore, but to get a call like that, and you're on stage with, you know, some of the greatest songwriters of all time that I grew up just, again, listening to and loving, it's pretty crazy. It was an incredible experience.
Absolutely.
So I'll still, but it was in Austin, so I didn't have to go anywhere, and that was amazing.
Nice.
So I'll still do stuff in town.
Yeah,
do
right.
records and stuff like that, but mainly focused on building this company. And I guess I can talk a little bit about this, but not a lot. Earlier this year in May, we did purchase another thing/company
Okay.
that we're going to be introducing next year.
Oh, cool.
A&F is a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
but also myself and two other business partners are a part of it independently as well.
Oh, nice.
So it's an interesting thing, but I am excited to share more with that. We'll have to circle back around and when it's closer to it, but
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, it's incorporated. It's definitely it's a big part of what A&F promotes, which is playing what you love and playing music.
Yeah.
So it's definitely joint, but that's been my journey, man.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the next 50 years are going to look like, but I'm sure it's going to be similar.
That's awesome, man. Good to know. I'm glad that you've got people such as yourself, as we mentioned earlier, sort of thinking out the box and bringing interesting designs and sort of interesting ways of even running a company in the first place out there. That is a good thing to hear. It gives me a little bit of hope for the future, man.
Thanks, man. That's very encouraging. It's definitely a labor of love, and it's not easy.
I hear you.
Not
Right
easy.
on. Well, man, I'm a fan. So one of these days, especially if I'm down in Austin, I got to come check some of this stuff out in person. I'd love to really see it and hear it.
Oh, I'd love to have you, dude. I'd love to have you, man. I'll show you around, and we've got our studio downtown is set up with all of our drum kits and snares. We try and keep the first one of everything.
Oh, amazing.
And so it's a great place to come and try stuff out because you can hear it, you know,
Awesome.
in the room. You can hear it under the mics and kind of have a field day with it.
Gotcha. Well, Ramy, it was great talking to you, man. Thanks for the history on the company and just walking us through the whole thing there. That was super cool. And again, I'm a fan of the drums, so it was real fun talking to you.
Thanks, man. Likewise. Thanks for having us, dude. I really appreciate what you do, man.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the nearly 200th episode here on the Crash Bang Boom podcast. And, of course, thanks to the man Ramy himself for hipping me to the many designs and processes behind the A&F drum designs. Super cool looking drums, and they sure as hell sound amazing as well. Got to get my hands on one or a couple or three at some point. We'll catch you all on the 200th one. Crash Bang Boom.